good morning, everybody. I feel like the room is out of balance. Like if this were a plane, I'd be telling some of you to move to this side of the room. This is our last in this series that we've been working on since way back in September. So how many of you have been with me the whole time? Excellent. We're going to finish strong today by talking about sort of the culmination of everything we've looked at to this point has been, we've talked about obviously everything to do with angelology from lots of different perspectives, but today we're going to conclude by talking about more maybe the more practical element of this, which would be how you can cultivate, develop a proper devotion to your spiritual companion, a proper devotion to your guardian angel, for instance. That's kind of been something I know that some of you have been interested in. Before I get started, I always worry that I'm going to forget to announce things, so I'm doing that at the beginning now. And I want to remind you of a few things that are coming up. This Thursday evening at 5:30, there is an ecumenical prayer service for the 8 children who lost their lives in that horrible act of violence. There will be an ecumenical service at 5:30, prayer service. We've invited lots of the major congregations and pastors from different churches in the area to be here for that, including the Jewish rabbi, and then all of the historic churches and certainly the larger church congregations. And then at 6:30, immediately following that at 6:30, there will be a mass. Okay, so bring your friends, encourage people to come. It's a great time to come together as a community and stand in unity for hope. So let's try to all do that. The other thing I want to tell you is that coming up because I won't see, well, unless you come on Wednesday night. We're going to continue, or actually finish, the 2-part series on this Wednesday night, the series on artificial intelligence, aliens, and Adam. So this Wednesday night, we're talking about aliens. Yes, you heard that correctly. What a topic for a Catholic church, right? But we're going to be talking about that as part of the looking at exploring sort of the age of technology, creation, and the dignity of the human being. So we're going to talk about what the church does to actually teach about that potentially. So we're going to look at that on Wednesday. That'll be the last of that series. Then look for the information coming out. It may have been in your flock note, I can't remember. The one for the summer. Did everybody see the one for summer? It's going to be a 3-part series looking at reading the book of Revelation through the church fathers, through the eyes of the church fathers, and not through contemporary pop culture, but going back and looking at what the church has historically taught about that text. And then we have coming up also this summer, there is a consecration of the United States to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. The United States bishops are doing this in June at their plenary session in Orlando, and so you'll be looking for this. There's a novena for the 9 days leading up to that, beginning on June 3rd. It's a beautiful, beautiful daily devotion leading up to that in honor of our 250th anniversary as a nation and 250 years of Catholicism in the United States. Okay, so have I forgotten anything? I think that may be the big points.
The concert this afternoon at 3
The concert this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Thank you, Father. Yes.
Organ and brass.
Organ and brass. Should be outstanding, yes. 3 o'clock this afternoon. Organ and brass. All right. Anything else I need to say? Okay, well, let's get started then. In earlier gatherings, I talked about, I just mentioned this, in earlier gatherings, going back to September, we have had this great series of speaking about, looking at the angels and the spiritual reality. Not only the good angels, of course, but those that were fallen as well. But we talked about the creation of angels, we talked about the hierarchy of angels, the choirs of angels. We talked about the role that angels play in salvation history, all the places we find them in the scriptures. We talked about their ministry and worship, how we actually are worshiping with them at every single Mass. We talked about that. And we also looked at the concept of the war in heaven, a spiritual warfare, the fall of Lucifer and the angels who fell with him, and what that means for us today is that we are engaged in ongoing spiritual battle here. So I thought this was interesting. I know I noted this at the very beginning, but I want to go back and highlight something again. I'm a kind of and maybe it's because of my role, in working in a university, but I do find myself sometimes being kind of a passive, but often very curious observer of what's going on in like culture and what the trends are. And so I was curious to know a little more about a reference I made at the very beginning, that there was a study that suggested that people of faith and no faith, people who have no religious faith, who purport or report to have no religious faith, actually believe in angels. So I was really interested in this, and I did a little bit of a deeper dive into that. So I found two separate 2023 polls, so this is just a few years ago, that found together approximately 68 to 70%, depending on which one you looked at, 68 to 70% of Americans believe in angels. And this is regardless of whether they are practicing any sort of religion in their life, whether they have a religious affiliation or not. So you've got that little Venn diagram. Y'all know what a Venn diagram is? So there's this little Venn diagram of the belief in angels, and it transects both populations. Interestingly, there are people who report to be of religious faith who don't believe in angels. Isn't that interesting? So I was on the one hand, I wish I hadn't gone to look at this, but belief in angels, I think, is more common. Certainly, if you look at these two major polls, and one of them was Pew Research, which is an outstanding data collector. I always look to them. They have a major study that comes out every 3 years of the religious landscape of America, and it's a totally secular, university-driven effort, and it's very, very good. But I was struck to see that belief in angels was more common than belief in the devil. Belief in angels, good angels, in other words, is more common than the belief in hell. Many people responded to be spiritual but not religious. Y'all know that term? I'm spiritual but I'm not religious. So they're still verified that they have this belief in angels, even among the religiously unaffiliated, and it seems to be this kind of persistent belief. So I did a little deeper dive into that Pew Research, and I realized that this has sort of spawned some new studies, which we don't really have yet. So stay tuned. Maybe I'll come back in a year or so and talk about that. But sociologists apparently have found this so fascinating that they've launched a new study of this particular aspect, because it's people who reject religion completely that still say they believe in a spiritual reality. So what does that mean? What is that? I think it's a great paradox that scholars have pointed out, that studies are showing that people are more likely to believe in angels than they are to belong to a church.
But do they believe in God?
They don't profess a belief in God. They profess a belief in a spiritual reality, including angels. Yeah, I know. This is why I say it's so fascinating that you have to see the data, but you've got this little, as I said, a little Venn diagram. And there are people who purport a belief in God who don't believe in angels. So it's an interesting cross-section of people. And as I said, sociologists are interested in this. It's launched a whole new study, to do a deeper dive into that group and find out what's driving that. What is driving that kind of belief system? So I think my takeaway, though, immediately, and I will share this with you, is that although we live in an age that is increasingly secular and feels that way to us sometimes out there, belief in angels has not disappeared, and it's proven persistent, unexpectedly persistent. And again, how many of you know Gen Z? So we have Gen X, we have Gen Y, which are the millennials, and we have Gen Z. Okay, so Gen Z is 1997-ish to 2012, okay? They are less institutionally religious, but very curious about angels. In other words, the way that they answered these questions indicate that they are interested in the unseen dimension or a transcendent dimension. And I think if you think about, Gen Z's fascination with fantasy worlds, I teach these people, okay? So Gen Z's fascination with fantasy worlds, to me, and imagination, I see it. Outside the church in a secular setting, I see their fascination with this unseen. And I think that maybe that's a starting point for that. You talk about the millennials born between 1981 and 1996, roughly, are very similar. And that's why I think during this past many months, what we've done, unpacking all of this, resonates with all of us because we know how we feel about angels. We know that we are obviously people of faith, but I do find it very compelling that this might be a doorway into a conversation with people, especially young people. This could be a way to begin that conversation. So I want to move beyond angelology though today. We've looked at a lot of that, but something more interior. How do we as Catholics deepen a true and a proper devotion relationship with the angels? I don't mean merely believe in them, which we all purport we do, but how do we develop a relationship with them? So yes, we know a lot about them. This is your final exam. Tell me about angels. They're a pure spirit.
Pure spirit. They had one choice.
They had one choice.
They only work for God.
What's that?
Pure intellect.
They're pure intellect.
They serve God only.
Messengers.
Serve God only. They can be messengers. Yes.
They have a they have a ranking.
Yeah, they're inquirers. They're ordered inquirers. Okay, good. Y'all all passed. This is good. But I don't want us to leave this series just knowing about them, although I think that's important, and I'm validated that you all got the answers right. But I think that it's more important that we're able to live with a conscious sort of interaction, devotion, relationship with them that is proper. Because doctrine. I mean, we can learn all the things the church teaches and still not apply that. Because doctrine is meant to become devotion. It's meant to form our devotion. And then devotion actually is meant to become transformation for us. So this is a process. You've learned all the right answers. Now what can you do with that? Because I think there's a difference between knowing one has companions on the road and then walking attentively with them. There's a difference between those two different scenarios. So I want to reflect today that angels are not simply doctrines of our faith, although they are, but they are our companions in our journey. From the moment we are conceived in the womb until our physical death and our transport to heaven, remember we talked about that, they are with us at every moment. And perhaps that's the deepest point to begin, is to realize that they're not an ornament, they're not something extra in our lives. They are part of the communion into which we have been baptized. And this again, going back to something we talked about week 1, the very beginning of this, because we say in the creed, what? I believe in all things visible and invisible. And we often rush past those words. We say them because they're rote. And I think we need to pause. Next time I'm going to challenge you to do that. Next time you say those words, stop and think that invisible creation is not empty. We say this, we profess this. So invisible creation is not something empty, it is filled. It is as vibrant as our visible reality. It's alive with intelligence. If you believe in angels, then you know this. It is alive with pure intellect, with love, and with a group, a body of spiritual beings that do nothing but praise God and care for us. So, and nations, care for nations too. So, Christian holiness has always involved recovering some kind of an awareness of that unseen relationship. And I'm going to go back and we're going to talk about, again, today, some of what the fathers have said about this. So you can see how consistent this teaching is across the ages. The awareness of this unseen companionship that we have. St. John Chrysostom preached, the whole air is filled with angels, he said. So imagine living if that were true. Imagine living if you believed that was true. Imagine living, excuse me, y'all. This always happens when I get up here to speak. Imagine living as if you believed that was true. Because it is. Okay. So how do we recover awareness of the unseen world? I've often thought about this, and we may have touched on this in here before too. There is something about going back and looking at more primitive kind of Christianity, earlier Christianity, the first centuries or so. that can be very instructive on many levels for us. First of all, I think we're struck with the fact that these people lived in an age at various times of persecution. Chrysostom himself is an example of that. Persecution, but also in an age that was really uncluttered with the things that we are distracted by, right? They didn't live with technology. They didn't live with instant access to information. They didn't live with a world that is so busy and filled and consumer driven and materialistic. So I think there is a great wisdom that is more pure and more simple when we go back and look at these earlier fathers, which is why, again, this summer I want to look at Revelation through that lens too, because it seems purer and more simple. One spiritual problem I think we see, the data I quoted you from these studies, one spiritual problem of modern Christians even is not our disbelief in angels. I mean, clearly we all say we believe that. It's forgetfulness. We forget they're there. It's not that we don't believe in them. We don't acknowledge them. We forget they're there. We live as though visible reality is all that there is. And I think the fathers would have found this tragic if they were here to speak to us today. For them, the Christian life unfolded in this cosmic liturgy, right? That's why I drew us back to the Sanctus. Remember in the Mass, and we talked about the angels' participation in the Mass. The fathers would have seen this as much more cosmic than we do, you know. Origen of Alexandria, for instance, said that the believer, he knew, this is his quote, the believer is praying surrounded by angelic hosts at all time, whether in the liturgy or in private prayer. Okay? So they expressed this belief that they're always there. St. Basil the Great wrote that beside each believer stands an angel as protector and shepherd. And we've talked about that, not metaphorically, but really. And yet how seldom we live with this awareness. I know I'm not telling you anything that we haven't talked about or that you don't know. How seldom and y'all, my hand is raised. I am convicting myself. I do this. I go through my day and don't acknowledge my guardian angel. I'll speak to my guardian angel first thing in the morning or last thing at night by saying the little prayer I learned when I was 10 years old, right? Mm-hmm. But how often do I go through my day and acknowledge my guardian angel? So what I want you to see is that the voices of the church through the centuries have some really practical things we can do to address that sort of, perhaps, I don't want to call it apathy, but perhaps sometimes it is our, sort of a vague kind of indifference, or going through your day simply driven by what are the things that are in the visible reality that are in front of you to do. Even when I'm in prayer, even when I'm in Mass, am I acknowledging my guardian angel? I often don't. So how do we do this? Not metaphorically, but really, really, really. And we don't just need to add more prayers. I mean, I don't think that's the answer. I think the answer is recovering attention. It's recovering that aspect that somehow we have lost. The spiritual fathers often spoke about this kind of recollection, this constantly being in awareness. To remember that you are accompanied, in other words, you walk accompanied, you pray accompanied, you suffer accompanied, and you worship accompanied, sort of every turn. That change, when you think about this, I mean, this is beautiful because it changes our suffering, doesn't it? To know that you're not alone. It changes solitude itself. Even temptation feels different. Even grief feels different. Even death. The awareness itself becomes a devotion. So one reason devotion to angels, I think, matters so much is because they teach us to slow down. They teach us to contemplate. And remember that they are beings ordered to do what? What are they always doing? Worshiping, praising God. That's right. They are made to adore. So when we talked about that before, that they are always oriented toward God. St. Gregory the Great says, and this is a beautiful, this is actually an AI creation that looks terrifying, doesn't it? But do you remember the seraphim? Remember the seraphim? This is a seraphim. Tells us that angels burn in unceasing contemplation. And remember, that's that highest choir of angels. Remember that? So, as a review point, for those of you, I see a couple of new faces. So, as a review point, do you remember that seraphim are those that are serving in the highest rank of angels? They're described biblically as having these eyes and all these wings. They're the ones that are described biblically. But do you remember we talked about the fact, next time you hear someone say that when you, because I see this all the time on social media, for instance, and it drives me crazy. Ever had anybody criticize you for having an angel like that and saying that's not what angels look like, that's not biblical? Have we ever talked about this?
Yes, we have.
Well, the reason that annoys me is because I don't think any of us would want something like that showing up. You know, and that the biblical description we have, to be clear, the biblical description we have of angels that people liken to this is one of those ranks of angels. Cherubim also have 6 wings, but we're not told what the lower angels look like. We're not told what Gabriel looked like when he showed up, right? But I bet it wasn't like that. I'm just betting.
He said, be not afraid.
Be not afraid. Well, sure, but who wouldn't be afraid by having some being a bright light showing up, right? But because we've seen throughout the scriptures that they can take on human appearance, okay? I have to hammer that again. I'm sorry. It's just it's one of my pet peeves. But they burn in unceasing contemplation, and certainly this is true, obviously, of all of them, but these at the higher rank. So what would it mean to let their companionship school us in adoration? What would it mean if the next time you go to adoration, you invite your guardian angel to be there with you? Because they already are. But we often treat, and I say we because I'm including myself in this, okay? We often treat prayer as speaking. You know, we're doing all the talking. Is that just me? We're doing all the talking. But the angels remind us that prayer is also beholding. It's just beholding, you know? So I think their companionship in many ways could educate us a lot more if we paid attention to them. Not through their words, because they're probably not going to show up and speak to us, although that's not beyond the realm of possibility, of course. But they can educate us through their presence. So what about a friendship with your guardian angel? Because we often speak of guardian angels. Well, what's happening here? St. Bernard of Clairvaux writes a beautiful little treatise about guardian angels. He spoke of their friendship, not just companionship, but friendship. You know, there is a difference there. There's recognizing that you're being accompanied and there's someone there, and then there's a relationship. And he speaks about this having to begin with gratitude. Gratitude that God gave this to you. This is a gift that God gave every human being. And to realize also that friendship involves reciprocity, doesn't it? Friendship involves reciprocity. It's a relationship of give and take. It's a relationship of at least not just acknowledging, not only acknowledging, but also trying to foster a relationship there that is built on being attentive, regularly attentive. Trust begins to develop. Devoted, grateful is the words that St. Bernard uses, not just informed. He urges us to think about, this is another quote from this treatise, he says, to treat your angel as your companion, your guide, and your witness to God himself. That this is, you remember that we think about the angel as being a mediator, not in the sense that Christ is the mediator, not like that, but a mediator, little m, a mediator between us and God. So, practical ways that you can do this. I mean, all this is great. Fathers, we love all these things, but what can we do? Some practical ways that you can tease out of what all the fathers have written, who've written extensively about angels, is speak. Speak to them. Speak to your guardian angel interiorly. Now, I do this, sometimes I have noticed that lately, as I've tried to practice more of this, I speak out loud in my car. How many of you talk in the car anyway? Talk to yourself? Yeah. Okay. Speak to your angel. Simply, before prayer, it might be something like, asking God even, help me know my companion. Ask your angel, help me know you. I mean, it's very simple. It's very simple. They're not expecting any elaborate kind of encounter with us. I think it's the acknowledgement. Help me know you. How about before difficult conversations? Have you ever been in a situation where you needed to go speak to someone, or you were going to have a meeting that you knew was going to be challenging? How about, and I'm saying this for myself too, what if before this difficult conversation, you simply say, go before me. I'm opening the door, you go in. Gauge the room, right? Read the temperature in the room and let me know. Go before me. Sit beside me. Just acknowledging that they are there. Before you go to sleep, keep watch. Can you keep watch for me tonight while I'm sleeping? This is actually an ancient Christian instinct, by the way. And what it does is it cultivates, as you begin to do this, it cultivates a habitual dependence. You see? Us. It becomes a habit and therefore becomes this kind of habitual dependence. We get into the pattern of doing this, good morning, go before me, sit with me, pray with me, keep watch. You do this all day and it becomes habit. And this is one of the things, you remember we talked about Padre Pio when we looked at him and how he spoke about this as if this were ordinary daily life. He regularly conversed with his guardian angel. Do y'all remember this?
Saint Gemma Galgani.
Yeah, exactly. When we talked about her too. And this is one of the practices that he talks about, is that you have to speak. They're not going to show up dramatically in your face. If they do, there's a big message probably, right? Yeah. But you have to be the one to initiate this. You have to initiate it. And as I said, it's actually an ancient Christian instinct. Ask your angel for purity of intention. The saints often do this. They link angels with purity. And remember, we even have that caricature, that little cartoon of the good angel and the bad angel, one on each shoulder, that each are talking to you at the same time. And so this is something that's a recurring theme among the saints too, is ask your angel, your guardian angel, for purity of intention, simplicity of heart. Because as St. Padre Pio said, they excel at this. They excel at this, purity. That's what they are. They're pure spiritual beings. They are perfect, pure intellect, and they have undivided love. Okay? So, ask your angel's aid in this. Help me desire God purely. Help me live purely. Help me communicate purely. And that itself is a devotion, just by asking. Let your angel assist you in your examen. How many of you do, and you don't necessarily have to raise your hands because I don't want to embarrass you, but how many of you do like a nightly inventory of I have to do this at the end of the day, is sort of daily, at least to click the boxes. The examen, yeah. The positive of that is, how have I encountered God today? Where did I see God today? How did God make himself known to me? But then also, who might I have injured? Who might I have harmed? What might I need to make reparations for and atonement for? Who do I need to go to apologize to? And I try to do this in at least like 30 seconds every night to review, what that is. And it occurs to me, this is another way. Let your angel assist you in that. And it might take more than 30 seconds, but ask, Show me where I was protected today. Help me be aware of that. Where was I prompted toward the good? Where were you today in prompting me toward the good? Where did I ignore you? Where did I ignore the grace? And I think that helps incorporate this angelic devotion properly into even our daily, like, close of day, to help us to draw closer to God, because that's what they're here for. That's what that's about. Even Ignatian devotion, I think, which is obviously profoundly Catholic, you can incorporate that angelic component into it. Okay? So speak, ask, allow. And then, if we look at, going back and looking at the fathers, again, what they have to say about liturgy, the church already teaches us how to love the angels. The church already teaches us, it's in our liturgy, and again, it's a matter of awareness. It's how often do we not really tune in? At every Mass, we join the angels, do we not? When we say what? Holy, holy, holy. We are not invited to imitate them in that moment. We are invited to join them fully, and that matters. There's a difference there. Remember, the Mass is not earthly worship that is oriented upward. The Mass is heavenly worship that is opening for us. The fathers understood this deeply. St. Cyril of Jerusalem, who I love because those of you, how many neophytes? Do we have some neophytes here this morning? We have a neophyte? I'm not going to pick on you. Well, people who come into the church at Easter, when they receive their initiation sacraments, they call them neophytes when they come in to really for their, after their initiation sacraments, they're new, of course, to everything, so they're neophytes. But St. Cyril of Jerusalem is the one, 4th century bishop of Jerusalem, who's the one who first articulated this period we call mystagogy, which is to unfold or to reveal the mysteries to neophytes. And in his catechetical lectures, he's got many, 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 many of them. I mean, can you imagine doing catechesis with the Bishop of Jerusalem, where he actually walked you to all the sites? And that's where the teaching was done, at the sepulcher, at Golgotha, But in his catechetical lectures, he writes a lot about this for catechumens. As he's explaining the Mass, that in the Sanctus we unite ourselves with the powers above. And he goes on to write about the powers in the same way that we saw that early sort of articulation of the different choirs of angels. He doesn't really break it down like that, but he says that there are different angels and they do different things. He's telling the neophytes this, but he emphasizes, quote, every Eucharist is angelic companionship before you. Every Eucharist, okay? So perhaps, maybe a practical devotion here would be to just pause maybe interiorly at the moment of the Sanctus and say to yourself, join the worship of the angels, and to acknowledge their presence, to acknowledge your guardian angel there as part of that. And I think that could begin to slowly change the Mass for us. So are you catching a theme that maybe it's not so much that we don't believe in angels and that we don't believe that they're not there? The problem is not one of belief, it's one of attention, intention, acknowledgement, remembering that they're there. Recovering this idea, adoration, I mentioned that before. Imagine that you go into adoration and the chapel becomes crowded with heaven. Just imagine that. The chapel is crowded with heaven. Certainly the ancient saints all lived this way. What did they have that we did not? It's the simplicity, it's the acceptance, it's the intentionality. It changes our reverence because it deepens our wonder. if we go in and we kneel before the Blessed Sacrament, we acknowledge Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, that he is truly, really there, and that we are surrounded by heaven. Okay, so acknowledging them in combat, spiritual combat. I think as we've seen in this series, sacred scripture does not sentimentalize angels for us, do they? The angels teach us courage, I think, maybe I would say, especially St. Michael, the archangel, who Father Rainey did an excellent job of unpacking that prayer for us. But he represents a lot more than protection. He represents fidelity. He represents faithfulness. Because when you think about that, do you remember, everybody remember Father Rainey told us what Michael's name means? Who is like God? It's a question. Who is like God? This was perhaps his statement to Lucifer in his pride and rebellion. Who is like God? So it's not merely a name. This represents humility. This is a humility, the antithesis of what you see in pride. Obviously, it's the antidote. It's the counter reaction, if you will. And maybe that's where devotion to Saint Michael especially becomes important. To invoke him is not just to ask him to go before you with a sword and a shield, which is how we all picture him, right? The warrior swooping down to slay, we see him even in our stained glass window in the chapel, and he's usually depicted on art with his foot on the head of the serpent, crushing the serpent, and he's got his sword drawn. But to invoke Michael is also to ask for humility, truth, courage, because at least in my mind, St. Michael represents all of this in his fidelity to God. Who is like God? He stands for truth. Okay? So there's this faithfulness that is there. Humility against pride, truth against deceit, courage versus fear. And it's much deeper, I think, than simply saying, protect me. It's wanting to be these things too. And Michael will help you do that. St. Michael is there to help us. He's there to protect us, but also to help us to live into these virtues. They help us in temptation. The Desert Fathers believe that temptations were often resisted, not just because you have, well, I'm just not going to do it, not by effort, but by calling upon heavenly aid, asking the angels to help you. So one practical discipline here, I think, would be when you're tempted toward anger, if you're not blinded by your anger, if you have the awareness that you're angry, invoke your angel. You know? When you're discouraged in some way, remember that discouragement is not of God. Everybody hear me say that? Discouragement is not of God. So if you're discouraged, you already know that's from a source that's not good and does not want your good. So who would you invoke when you feel discouraged? Your guardian angel, for sure. Saint Michael. Because that's evil. That's an evil. That is a clear evil. When you are spiritually tired, ask for your angel's help. And again, all of this is to say, not because God's grace is somehow insufficient or that it's incomplete. We're not saying that at all. We're saying that we can often acknowledge that grace comes through this companionship that we have because God gave us this personal being. Okay, so I'm not saying don't say, God, your grace is insufficient, I need my angel. But it's always a good starting point. So here is a kind of a thought that I think our tradition often tries to teach us. The Catholic tradition tries to teach us, and how much we listen to it again. I'm speaking to myself. Angels teach us how to be better friends to each other. to each other. How is this? Okay, so who is your first companion? You're in the womb. Who is your first companion? Well, yes, your mother, biologically, yes. Yeah, let me ask this a different way. Who's your first spiritual relationship? It's your guardian angel that you've had from the moment of conception. That's your first friend. So what can we learn about friendship? I mean, this is a model, obviously, that was given to us. And if you think about it this way, even, how do they teach us to be better friends to each other? Think about the attributes of angels we have studied for the past 8 or 9 months or so. Because they love without possessing. Do you ever feel like your angel is too interfering in your life? Probably quite the contrary. We're not aware of them. They love without possessing. They serve without demanding anything in return and no recompense. Your angel ever shown up and said, okay, you owe me $5 for today? No. And they protect us without controlling us. So look at that, look at those attributes. Isn't that a model for friendship? Holy relationships with other people? Love without possession, serving without demand, protecting without control, and how rare that is. You know, human love is often, and human friendships, human love, any kind of relationship, is tangled, chaotic. You know, there's always some confusion. They can be broken even. But what the angels show us is that love is ordered. Love, when it's properly oriented, is ordered. And it's ordered to the good. And this is what St. Thomas Aquinas is talking about, I think, when he writes in the Summa, that authentic love is that which always serves the good of the other. That's authentic love. And if it's not doing that, it's not love. So the angels have a lot to teach us just in their attributes that we've looked at all this time to say that this is ordered, this is pure, this is transparent, this is oriented toward God. So maybe developing a devotion to your angel would purify even your human relationships by teaching us how to accompany souls toward God. So there's a very popular quote that makes the rounds of pop culture a lot. And many of you have probably seen it before. Y'all ever seen that? We are all just walking each other home. Anybody seen that? Well, this actually comes from a man named Ram Dass, who is, it's a beautiful, beautiful thought. And to be clear, this man was not Christian. He was influenced by many other religions in the 1960s. He was involved, I don't know if any of you remember your 1960s history, but he was involved with Timothy Leary and the great LSD experiments. So just as a disclaimer, that's where this is coming from, okay? But I've always been struck by the pure simplicity of this. Although this direct quote did not originate in our Christian tradition, he echoes one of the greatest fathers of our church, St. Augustine, who speaks about the church here being made up of pilgrims who are on a journey together. He says the pilgrims walk together, they journey together to the city of God. This is in the work city of God. He talks about how we are all traveling together toward the eternal city, okay? From the earthly city toward the eternal one. Not towards ourselves, but to something eternal. And so there is wisdom. There is wisdom in this because it speaks to this same universal truth that we are accompanied. We accompany each other and we ourselves are accompanied in an unseen way. And the saints lived with this awareness. St. Francis de Sales had this kind of radical idea, and I never thought about this. He said, why don't you ask why don't you greet someone's angel before you greet the person that you're going to encounter? You ever thought about this? Imagine this. Excuse me while I speak to your angel. Before speaking to someone, I mean, especially maybe this is a difficult thing, because this is the context that St. Francis de Sales writes about this. Silently greet the angel. You don't have to do it out loud. Even take a split second to pray with that angel. Acknowledge that angel. And he says this changes everything. It changes your charity. It changes perhaps their charity more than yours, and it can prevent conflict. Because you're automatically acknowledging that there is a spiritual dimension to your encounter with this person that goes beyond the physical, that goes much deeper, that goes much higher when you acknowledge that person's angel. Has anybody ever thought about this before? Is this just me? This was like, what? So I'm going to try that. I'll let you know how it goes. I'm going to try that. What if devotion to angels could actually deepen our ordinary Christian relationships? The saints certainly thought so. I think you've seen that consistently. They certainly prioritize this relationship above our human ones. So, one danger, one caution I think we always have to remember is that the more spiritual a devotion feels, the more it needs grounding. Yeah? The more it needs grounding. It's a great paradox of our faith. The more spiritual we want to become and enter into that spiritual, invisible reality, the more actual grounding it probably needs in our lives. Because the fathers would insist, love the angels, love them, but do not become fascinated with them. Do not worship them. Do not make them the object of your adoration. There's a huge difference. The angels always point away from themselves. That is a clear takeaway. They always point away from themselves. If you are encountering a being on a spiritual level that is not pointing away from themselves, that is either pointing to something worldly or pointing to themselves, guess what? That might be an angel, but it might be one that got expelled a long time ago. Okay? So this is what, again, the fathers would insist that they always point away from themselves. They're always oriented toward God. As in Revelation, when St. John falls before an angel, remember the angel says, quote, do not worship me. Do you remember this? Do not worship me, worship God. That is angelic spirituality. Anything that becomes esoteric, obsessive, detached from sacramental life, that'd be another big clear warning sign. That's distortion. So, what kind of things in us would be increased by proper devotion to an angel? What are the things that we would notice that might be increased? Therefore, if this is true.
Certainly our prayer life would be increased.
Prayer life. Your prayer life is going to be increased, yes. What kind of attributes or virtues? Humility. Humility. Purity. Obedience. Charity. You know the list. All right. All the good. All the good. And if it doesn't, if we are cultivating what we believe is a devotion to our spiritual companion and it doesn't do those things, you probably should seek some spiritual guidance, pastoral guidance on that. Test it by its message. What is it telling you? And what is it fostering in you? So I want to suggest kind of and this is something I'm actually saved this for myself. So a simple kind of devotion would be on a daily basis, would maybe look something like this. Invite your guardian angel to accompany you that day. You know, I mentioned, I do this, and I'm guilty of doing it by rote. You know, I wake up and it's the first thing I say, angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love commits me here. It's road. We just road. So be maybe for myself even to be a little more intentional about inviting my guardian angel to accompany me that day. Okay, that's a morning thing. At Mass, consciously join in the angelic worship. I mean, acknowledge that they're there, even if you can't see them. Okay? Every time you are tempted to do anything, if you're tempted to anger, if you're tempted to greed, if you're tempted, well, whatever the thing is, right? Invoke your angelic aid. Okay? And then once a day, perhaps in the evening, just give thanks for the protection you've had that day, or thanks for the accompaniment that day. And I really believe that if, and again, this is drawn very simply from all those models I showed you from the fathers. They all speak to these things in great big words and long paragraphs, but if you reduced it down to something practical and simple you could do every day, I think it would look something like this. Because at every time you are acknowledging that they are there. Again, not in a way that takes your attention off of God, but in a way that orients you more purely toward God. It's a way of honoring God. Angels are His creation for us. So I think it can become a way of living with practice. And I want to sort of summarize by saying this too, real quickly, then we can talk about it. The Christian journey, if you read, all the great minds of the faith, the Christian journey is often described as a pilgrimage. Yeah? It's often described that way. But pilgrimage, kind of the idea of it, I think, can feel lonely. And sort of all of the teaching about angels would tell us that it is not lonely. You walk accompanied, protected, encouraged, surrounded. And I think one reason then our devotion to angels matters so much is because it restores our wonder. It can restore our sense of childlike innocence. How many of you have noticed that in art, I've always found this curious, in art, did I have another slide? I think that was it. No. That's St. Augustine. Okay, y'all hold on, come back to St. Augustine. Have you ever noticed that in most art depicting guardian angels, anybody ever noticed a theme? I'm having to go back all the way to the beginning, I'm sorry.
Children.
They're always depicted with children. And I think that that's because the theme here is not that they're just created for children. It's that we have to have this kind of a sense of wonder, like a child. We have to be able to recover that innocence of suspending our disbelief or suspending what is visible. Children have vivid, wonderful imaginations, do they not? So I think that's why this theme in art is so common, is because this is what we're invited to enter, is the wonder of a child. So I want to go back to St. Augustine. Y'all stand with me just a second. Hang with me. I'm talking about the idea of pilgrimage. Is that he says the angels are our fellow citizens. This is in his work, City of God, where he describes the heavenly city. The earthly city where we all are now is the one that's bound in time and the one that's passing away. But the heavenly city is the one we are all on pilgrimage to, where we're all going. And he describes them this way. He doesn't say they're our helpers. He says they are our fellow citizens. What a phrase. Think about that. Citizens of a heavenly Jerusalem. Citizens of a place we are going. Companions in a shared homeland. So one day, when grace carries us home, as it will all of us, those invisible companions are going to become a visible joy. And we're going to know those people, those angels who accompanied us, citizens who accompanied us into the heavenly city. And maybe that's, I think, the big takeaway is to live already in the friendship with the one who has been with you all along, to share eternity. So, may your guardian angel deepen your prayer. May St. Michael strengthen your courage. May all the holy angels school us in adoration, and may we learn to walk through this world more conscious of where we are going. Amen?
Amen.
All right. God, I'm done with this series. This is it.